Hello everyone. Welcome to part 4 of the academic research series. So today we are going to discuss about research paper writing. So I'm guessing that at this point you've understood how you can conduct the entire research life cycle. And after you finish the research, you need to write a research paper and submit to some venue like a journal or conference, which I will talk about in the next tutorial. But now let's focus on how you want to write the research paper. All right. So let's first do one thing. Let's start with this particular paper. So I'm going to give you an example and I'm going to show you how to write the paper. So this is a method paper, but before we talk about how this paper is written, let me talk about the authorship criteria. So you can see there are 4 authors in this paper. So I'm the first author right here. This is my name and this is the last author. So the first author is the one who is doing most of the work of the paper, the experiments, the analysis, etc. The last author is the one who is the supervisor. So this guy was the one who supervised this entire research and he had the brilliant ideas throughout the research. So this guy is also very important. So understand that normally the first and the last author are the most important authors of the paper. Okay, the second author is also important, but he will be a little bit less important than the first one. And then there will be the third author who will be less important, and so on and so forth. Now, I want to also mention one thing. Sometimes you are going to see, let me clear this up first. Sometimes you are going to see that there is this kind of like asterisk sign, okay, on two others. So this sign will appear only when the two others are contributing equally. That means there are two first authors in the same paper. So if this sign would be there in this with these two authors, then I mean both Rafid and Zhonghui would actually have equal contribution and both of them would be joined first author. That is another thing. So next thing are these 1, 2, these things. So let me clarify this. So 1, 2 means this particular person belongs to institution number 1, which is University of Singapore, and institution number 2, which is School of Computing, National University of Singapore. Here you can see only one because this guy, this particular researcher, he is also my supervisor. So he belongs to only institution number 1. Okay, that is what this 1, 2 signifies. And finally, there is a star right here. So star means the corresponding author. So what is a corresponding author? A corresponding author, you can see the email address of the corresponding author right here. A corresponding author is someone whom the journal will actually email to. So the journal in which you submit your paper, that journal can have different questions about your paper, different correspondences. So those correspondences will be addressed to actually me for this paper. Okay. And also later on, after the paper is accepted or the paper is public, then different people will write the paper. If they have any question, they will address that question to me because I am the corresponding author. Now, which people will you actually want to include in your paper? So actually, ideally, people who have some level of intellectual contribution to the paper, those guys you should include in the paper. So people who gave you some brilliant idea of the paper, who designed some algorithms, who wrote code, who did some experiments, who wrote the paper, etc., and who helped in data collection. You can include all of them in the paper. Okay. Now that we know the authorship criteria and we are sort of like on the same page with the authorship, let's dive into the different sections of the paper. So understand that this paper is about a method. This is a method paper. So as I said before, in one of my previous tutorials that we have mainly 5 research types. So this research type is the method type research. So we are describing a method called GC-figshare, which is nothing but a correction method. So this method corrects for some bias in the human DNA. So that is the task of this method. So what I could write is I could write a manual which says how this method was developed, how it should be used, and so on and so forth. But that wouldn't be a scientific paper. A scientific paper has to be a story. Okay, so it should be written in a way which actually intrigues the reader, and the reader sort of like, I mean, feels like he's reading some sort of story behind the whole thing. Okay, so let me explain how I have written GC-fix method as a story. So first thing is abstract. So different journals have different abstract requirements, and so you have to write it accordingly. Abstract is nothing but a summary of the whole paper. So it doesn't have to be artistic. It just has to contain the summary of the paper. That's it. Then there will be some important keywords. So these keywords are important because according to these keywords, the journal will decide like which experts to give this paper to so that they can evaluate your work. Then we have the introduction section. So here you can see how the story is written. First, I talked about why we need to perform this correction, the motivation. Then I talked about the current available methods and their problems. Then I talked about brief explanation of our contribution. So after reading the introduction section, you sort of understand what is going on in the entire paper. So the introduction section is the most important section of the paper because this is what people will read first and, well, basically decide whether your paper is relevant to their work or not. So next, when we describe our method, we first write about the expected raw input of the particular method. We talk about how we input the preprocessing, how we preprocess the input, basically the workflow. Then we move on to the correction process itself, talk about how this correction method can be used. And then we move into the experiment section where we talk about the data collection for evaluation, the evaluation details, and comparative analysis with existing methods. As I said before in one of my tutorials, that we need to compare our method with existing methods to actually show that our method is actually useful. So finally, we try to give some real-life improvements via this correction, some real-life applications of the proposed method. And then we conclude by talking about how GCFix is a natural progression of the previous works, its utility and future possibilities, right? So it sort of looks like, a story, like it's not boring and it's not like a manual. So it should be interesting. So I'm going to show you another example of such a storyline. For example, this is a benchmarking paper. So in this paper, I have benchmarked 11 tools. 11 different tools that are actually used for, some kind of protein identification, basically, some identification task. So DNA binding protein, we can call it DBP in brief. So let's call it DBP for now. So we have benchmarked 11 DBP identification tools. Now, what we could have done is we could have done tool 1, tool 2, tool 3, tool 4, tool 5, up to tool 11. We could describe all of them and write down their results and finish the paper. No journal will accept that because it is not a story. That is possible, right? It's not, it makes sense. You are benchmarking 11 tools. So you just write their names, write their advantages, disadvantages, write the results that you got, and you finish the paper, right? So it's reasonable, but not reasonable for the paper. So let's now see how we actually make this very simple thing into a very beautiful story. So like before, we write an abstract summarizing our contribution. Then we have the introduction section. So here first we start with the importance of DBPs, the DNA binding proteins. Then we talk about the motivation behind our benchmarking study, overview of the computational methods which we benchmark, overview of the used features in these tools. Then we talk about the major issues with the existing methods. And finally, our contribution in this benchmarking study. So after reading the introduction section, people already know what to expect. And if it is not relevant to your work, they can skip the paper. That is the beauty of the introduction section. And as I said before, introduction is actually the most important section of your paper. Then we talk about the benchmarking tools. Now again, we will not write tool 1, tool 2, tool 3. Rather, we are going to nicely categorize tools. For example, we did some feature representation based categorization, and we actually made 3 categories here, like I wrote here, and I briefly described those tools as 3 categories. Then I also talked about the model-based categorization, like what kind of model they're using, and I divided them into 2 categories, the methods, and finally dataset-based categorization, what kind of dataset they are using. So according to the dataset, I can also categorize these methods. So it's a nice way to actually show, basically cluster the methods together based on different type of categorizations, basically. So then we talk about the benchmarking issues, what issues or what problems we faced during benchmarking and how we overcame them. Then we talked about the current dataset details and limitations, so and why we need to develop our own dataset. And then we go on to develop our own dataset. We talk about the difficult and the easy dataset that we also prepared for benchmarking. We talked about the tool evaluation pipeline, like how we exactly step by step evaluated the tools. And then we go on evaluating the tools, basically. We trained on the proposed dataset, we trained on an unbiased dataset. We again evaluate after the improvement in training dataset. We compare against traditional tools that are out there. We also try to combine traditional tools such as BLAST with the best tools according to our investigation. We then say that, okay, we have benchmarked all of them, but let's do some error analysis. So we looked at the errors from different perspectives, such as sequence length, something called e-ratio, then motive score, and so on and so forth. And finally, we go on to discuss our findings and recommend some particular feedbacks that we got from our investigation. So we start with the good and bad sides of different tools and use features according to our experimental validation. We then talk about the errors that the different methods actually made. We talk about the recommendations regarding the datasets. We also talk about our recommendations in making the methods more usable and reproducible, because we saw that many methods that we benchmarked are not actually reproducible. Also, we talk about how our investigation is also useful for different type of method development. And finally, we go to the conclusion section where we talk about our contribution summary and how this is useful for future researches. So that is basically all about the story. So it's a nice story basically. And when you write the paper, you can actually arrange your works in this way. So method paper, benchmarking paper, these are the most common types of papers that you will work on, especially as early career researchers. So I think these should be good enough for you. Very important is you need to also put references. If you are using some idea from other works, or if you are referring to previous works, you need to actually reference their works. Okay, for example, I mean, I have a few references here. For example, let me see. Okay, for example, here, right, you can see some references. So reference number 30 refer to this paper right there. So I have many references in this work. So I have like 103 references. Okay. So you should also give references to other people's work, because obviously when you do a research, you will do it based on other people's work as well. You will take idea from them, you're going to compare with their work, and so on and so forth. You can actually see the same thing here. You can see different references right here. Now, one thing you can see is there is no 1, 2, 3, 4 right here in the references, whereas here there is 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And also, I think the referencing style here is a bit different. Yes, you can see that the full name of the author is here, like Zhu et al. 2021, etc. So the references are given in this way. But in this benchmark paper, the references are given as 30, 31, 34, 35, etc. So those are two different referencing styles, and these styles are actually according to the journal style. So when you want to submit a paper to a journal, every journal has some specific requirements of styling of references, so you need to follow that style. So that is all about references. Now, the next thing is you want to obviously make your method available, right? If you are trying to develop a method, or if you are doing benchmarking study, you want to make your code available. So how can you make your code available? So one very reasonable way is to make it available via GitHub, right? So let me show you an example. So you can see that I have a GitHub page right here. So you can also make a GitHub page for your method. And I have the whole method here. So the method description is right here. What things to be installed are written right here. How do you run my method is written in detail right here. So this will help a lot. I mean, this will help the community a lot to actually run and use your method in the correct way. So similarly, you can see for this work, the benchmarking work, I mean, we have given the best tools according to our investigation. We have made them available to the people. So you can see it's the same thing. Things you need to install, then how do you actually use it, like what command you are going to give to actually run the tool on your data. So that is all about the GitHub. So I mean, you don't have to do it in GitHub. You can do it in figshare. You can do it in Code Ocean, etc. I mean, that is also okay. So I think nowadays people are also doing it in Code Ocean. So CODE code, OCEAN, Ocean, basically. So if you actually drop your code there, that code is actually runnable directly. So there is some computing capsules there. You can run your code there directly. So it is very easy for other people to evaluate your method if you do it in that way. But I like the good old GitHub. That is why I have done it here. Now, how do you upload your data? So if you have a lot of data which you want to upload, how do you do that? So a good way to do that is to use Zenodo. So Zenodo is a free repository for data, for dumping data. So you can dump up to 100 gigabytes of data for a single project. So I have dumped some data right here as a zip file, so people can actually easily access it. You can just give the link in the paper, right, to make it available. Now, what can you do if your data is more than 100 GB? It is very, very unlikely. But if you are doing research in genomics and you are working with large BAM files in genomics, then it can be more than 100 GB. In that case, your best bet is to use EGA. Let me show you. So EGA is nothing but European genome phenome archive. This is EGA. So you can dump your data in EGA in that case. And I have a nice tutorial on how to do this. I will leave the link in the description for EGA. Okay, now let's talk a bit about the figures. So obviously in your work you have a lot of figures. Let me show you some figures here. For example, in GCFigs we have the method overview figure. We have a figure analyzing the blood data, another figure to compare the methods and different evaluation metrics, and finally another figure to show the performance on different real-life applications. Okay. Now, one thing to note here is that if you zoom in closely, these figures are actually very, very high resolution. You can see that texts are not breaking up. This is because they are vector graphics, and I will actually recommend you to use Inkscape to do this. You write it down here, Inkscape. So you can just download it. It's a free software basically. It's a free software you can download and use it. You can also use Adobe Illustrator, which is not free and it requires a license, but there are pirated alternatives, which I will not recommend you to use. But anyway, so those are the two things people normally use to do this. And also, if you are drawing like normal flowcharts and not doing complicated stuff, you can also use draw.io. So draw.io, okay? So it's up to you, like which you want to use. But in all these three tools, you can actually draw vector graphics, and those will be extremely high resolution figures. Okay, now let's talk a bit about tables. So also in your research paper, you can have some tables. For example, here you can see that we have a nice table for the different benchmarking tool summarization. We have another table for summarizing the data and so on and so forth. So you can have these tables in your paper as well. Okay. So one thing I want to mention is that you can see there are only 4 figures right here, right? So, in this paper, you have only 4 figures, but there is also something called supplementary figures. So let me talk about this first. So I will just open this. So you can see there are a lot of supplementary figures in this work, and I've actually referenced to these figures a lot of the time. For example, let me press Ctrl F. Supplementary data. Okay, let me see. Yeah. So these are my supplementary figures. So it's fig S14. So S14 means supplementary figure 14 basically. So you have many supplementary figures here. Now supplementary figures are those figures which are not super important for the paper, but they help to convey your idea in more detail. So normally people don't look at the supplementary figures, but if they're really interested in your work, if they really want to replicate it, then they will go through the supplementary figures. So same goes for supplementary data. I can show you some. So you can see some supplementary data here, which helps to illustrate the paper more. So you can put those as separate and then refer to those in your work. So let me show you some references here. So supplementary data too, right? So like that. So supplementary data doesn't need to be a PDF for say. It can also be other kinds of files. For example, let me show you here. So here you can see there are Excel sheets. Let me open one Excel sheet to show you. So here you can see that I've talked about different tools and their issues right here, the replicability issues. So you can also provide your supplementary data as Excel files, and it is actually very important to provide them as Excel files if they contain a lot of like numbers, right? You don't want to put all those numbers as some PDF. It's very hard to work with those numbers in that case. So yeah, that's all about the supplementary data and figures. Now, one final thing I want to mention is you can see that how I wrote this paper, the formatting of this paper and the abstract, and also the references is actually, the referencing style, I should say, is actually quite different from this one. So the abstract here is different. Then we have some key points, some autobiography, then we have different referencing style and so on and so forth. Now, how exactly are we going to format this paper so beautifully and easily? And how do we place all these tables and figures without creating a lot of space? Actually, it's quite simple. I would recommend you to use Overleaf LaTeX. So Overleaf LaTeX, you can just search here like this, Overleaf LaTeX. So it's a web-based platform. So you can just go here, create an account and just use this very easily. And for each different journal, it has like templates and you can directly work on the template. And it's just very, very easy to manage your workflow here. Now, if you want to learn about LaTeX and Overleaf, I have a tutorial series for that. So it's I think 8-part tutorial series, will take you like around 2 hours to complete. If you complete that series, I can promise you that you can write any paper you like. using your knowledge that you will gain from the tutorial series. So go check that out if you're interested. I think it will be a real eye-opener for you. If you don't want to work with LaTeX Overleaf, which I will recommend you to work with because it's really creates the professional vibe in your paper, then what you can do is you can also work on Word. I mean, Microsoft Office Word, I mean, we all know about Word, right? But if you're working with Word, then you need to sort of like, I mean, create your own templates, do a lot of things manually. And obviously for the references, you need to use some third-party libraries. So a few libraries are the Zotero. So Zotero is one library. And also there is a thing called Mendeley. So you can also use that. Mendeley Reference Manager. So yeah, that is all about this tutorial series and hope to see you in the next tutorial where I talk about journal submission process, which is very important topic. I will leave the link in the description. If you like the video series, definitely make sure to donate in the channel because that's what helps us keep making great contents. And also feel free to like and share and subscribe the channel. Right? Thank you very much. See you in the next video.